So something that I really want to start doing more of here on the channel is having conversations with people, right? I've had great guests on in the past, from Adam Welsh at DJI to Adam Bry from Skydio to Kyle Nordfors from Weber County Search and Rescue, all talking about the drone industry and different things, different topics that impact what we do on the day to day. Now, over the past couple of months, I've done some traveling up over the Canadian border. So I've been in Tofino, I've been in Saskatchewan, I've been in Nova Scotia, I've been all the way up north in Labrador City. I've been all over the place. So I've been doing a lot of flying while I've been on foreign ground, so to speak. As somebody that flies drones living in the United States, it seems like Transport Canada and the FAA are kind of going hand in hand in terms of what they deem are the rules and regulations for drone flight, both on the commercial and the hobbyist side. There are definitely some differences between the two, and there's something going on right now with Transport Canada that is really going to, I would say, screw over drone pilots, and it's kind of the manufacturer's fault, the drone manufacturer's fault. So why don't we bring on somebody that is much more well-educated in this topic? It's Josh Ogden from AVSS. As you guys know, I went up there and I actually saw them crash test some drones using their parachutes. So it's great to have him on to talk about this topic because he knows way more than I do. All right, so Josh, thanks so much for sitting down with us to talk about this topic. It's something that I needed, I guess, an industry professional to come in and explain. I know that you and I have been talking about it now for probably about a week or so, and I really haven't been able to find anybody else that's been able to break it down like you. So as I mentioned, and as people have seen on the channel before, you run a drone parachute company, right? So what was your goal with starting AVSS? And I guess, like, what's your main thing that you do within your company?
Yeah, so my name is Josh Ogden. I'm the CEO of AVSS. What do I do? Well, today I was in the field testing, sometimes, financial models. I do everything, but, that's this tech company life. That's normal. But the premise of our business was based on existing regulations in France and Chile in 2017. And the concept that you can't have a drone fall out of the sky, you need to have backup systems. Our big bet was not only France and Chile recognize this, but other countries would recognize the value of having a redundant backup system and making sure that our fellow citizens are safe when drones are whipping up above their heads.
Sweet. Yeah. So, I came up and I saw it firsthand. You guys testing some parachutes on the M30, the M300, I think the Mavic 3 as well we were dropping. And really the main goal, right, is not to like save the drone. The equipment is kind of the last of your worries. You really want to make sure that the people underneath of the drone, if there were to be a malfunction, would be safe, right? So the parachute kind of, I guess, softens the blow when the drone comes down. And is it going to injure anybody on the ground, right? That's the main goal.
Yeah. And like the technical topic is more about severe injury and something called the AIS, abbreviated injury scale, and basically a certain amount of kinetic energy transfers to a human and causes certain types of injury. When you exceed these thresholds, people die. So the regulators want these parachutes basically to make sure that humans aren't hurt. They're not worried about the assets, the trucks that are hanging out. They're worried about not hurting anyone. Again, it's crewed aviation. They're used to making sure that planes don't fall out of the sky because it causes not only economic harm, but it takes human life. So the purpose of the parachute, from our standpoint, is to get regulatory approval so that the drone can fly over people. The regulator says you need to have a backup system, a frangible system, something that dissipates the energy so we're not hurting bystanders, people not involved, and our fellow citizens.
Sure, yeah, and I feel like, again, everything you just said is the reason that I come to you for something like this, because you're so involved with the regulatory side of things, being a drone parachute company, right? I mean, I feel like everything comes down to regulation. So I guess the real reason that we're talking is because of your LinkedIn post that you made recently about Transport Canada removing specific drone manufacturers off of their approved drone list. So I guess give us a little bit of information about that. Like, what is this list? How are you on the list? Why is this something that affects pilots? Like, give us the rundown as if you were explaining it to, let's say, a 10-year-old as to what's going on.
Okay, yeah. So to break it down, that in Canada, if you want to make money and fly commercially, you're going to run into restrictions about airspace. You're going to be near airports, near people, over people. And in 2018, 2019, the rules came out that said, okay, we're going to create a basic category and an advanced category. A basic category, be under 25 kilograms, flying out in like a farmer's field, go to town, buy off-the-shelf drones, go ahead and go to work. And then the advanced list is something where it's in controlled airspace, near people, and over people. So you have three categories. And in that list, they have something called, because we don't call them drones, we call them RPAS, remotely piloted aircraft systems. They have basically a safety declaration saying these drones can fly in controlled airspace with these certain redundancies or these communication and link performances near people and over people. We focus on over people, like that's our sweet spot. So in over people, you're flying directly over heads or within 5 meters. You need to have a system that demonstrates that no single source of failure will cause a severe injury. You also need to make sure that it doesn't provide extra burden on the pilot and they don't have to do crazy things to make the system work. And so this category opens up, flying over a crowd of people for security, like the RCMP might do. You might have a mission where you're flying. We have customers that fly bridge inspections, and they're worried that somebody's going to walk underneath the bridge and they can't guarantee it. But they don't want to pay for a security team to go rope it off, so they buy a parachute so that if someone does go underneath, they're covered. Drone delivery companies will need this. And this is just basically reducing the likelihood that somebody would be hurt. There's other rules with special flight operator certificates like waivers that you can then need it for making sure the drone stays within the containment zone. But basically this list is, if I'm a drone pilot, this list tells me which equipment to buy so I can do my job. So this list is a trust list. And in Canada, what we've seen with pilots is they don't really care what you did to get on the list. They just want to know you're on the list, and so they can check box. Now, the more in tune pilots on the regulation side, like the aviation background, they'll start asking more questions on how you complied. But that's like 10%. Most people, it's kind of like when you go buy your car, your Tesla, your Mercedes, your Toyota. You go to the dealer, you assume it's passed all these safety checks, you buy it and you go. And that's what the drone pilots are like. And they're buying these drones either directly from the manufacturers or the dealers. And they're saying, okay, this drone is on the list. I want to buy that drone. Now, what's really crappy in this current situation is you have a bunch of dealers who might have sold a product that's no longer on this list. And it's like, hey, when they sold it, this drone was on the list. And so I think one thing that this whole situation is going to do is everyone's going to get scrutinized and be questioned on like, show me your paperwork, which they should be doing. But I think when we look at like the automotive industry, like it just wasn't practical. And like, how much do you expect your drone pilot to know on this compliance? You and I looked at this list before on like what it takes to be compliant. It's 66 pages of content. Like it's a lot to read and like digest, and like you're gonna have to read it a few times. So like it's very understanding. But this list is basically what the problem is pilots perceive that if you're on this list, Transport Canada checked, Transport Canada approved, and it's not the case. It's a self-declaration list. This is a list that says somebody said they did everything and they declared. Now, one thing, as I showed you on the list, like individuals can be fined up to $3,000, corporations can be fined up to $15,000 per false declaration. So some of these companies have had like 10 declarations removed. Like, is Transport Canada going to give them a $150,000 fine? Like, I personally would say you should, to set the point. Because on my side, going back to it and kind of complete this rant on this situation, why we're all fired up and very engaged with it, is like, if I'm spending $200,000 getting compliance on the M300 because I do ASTM F3322 parachute testing, I do F3389 ATD crash test dummy testing, I do the quality controls, the tuning, updating the system with the firmware, like I'm in for over $200K, and that doesn't include my ongoing operations, my production, and it doesn't include all the steps I took to build that core product. That's just on that specific drone. So this list ultimately is gospel to the pilots, and I think the pilots are going to realize that, like, yes, it's the list that you have to comply with, but now you have to go do extra homework because and to defend Transport Canada's side, it's like they wanted the Canadian market to be easy to get into and create businesses. They wanted this to be a leapfrog market. We have 40 million people now. It's not the biggest market, but it's a really good testing ground to get out there and get experience. And people are running successful businesses as drone operators because how easy it is to comply. You don't need to go through all this crazy MOC, DOC stuff. But now we're starting to see the consequences that the regulator gave you some rope, and a bunch of companies have hung themselves, in my opinion. Like, we've done access to information requests. In the States, we would call it a FOIA, Freedom of Information. And in those requests, like, you see like 10 companies be audited and requested, and I showed you this data before, and then you see that, okay, only 20% responded within the timeline. You had 30 days, and then another 20% eventually responded, so they missed the deadline, which, if the regulator's asking you for your homework, like, you show it. And so that means 60% are like accidental declarations by operators. I do believe those were mistakes, confusion, but I see drone manufacturers and modifiers like parachute vendors our competitors that have made these declarations, but they're false. They're not legit, and like they're now, like I saw one company stating to their clients that, oh no, this was just suddenly thrown on us. It's like, no, I've seen your access to information request. That was first requested on September 5th. Now, in defense of some companies, when you submitted your information, you put only one email. So maybe Transport Canada should have multiple email addresses, contact points, because they've removed companies. Like, I know Autel got removed. My personal view is like, based on the quality of the company, the technology, I think that like their drone would comply with near people and controlled airspace. They're not declaring for over people. They're declaring for near and controlled airspace. Mm-hmm. And I think that was just an administrative issue, and you'll see them back on the list hopefully in a few weeks, if not sooner. I don't know for sure, but like I think there are some people who genuinely like, hey, my old employee submitted that documentation and I didn't realize that I should have updated the email. Like that happens, and that'll be a lesson learned, and Transport should have a secondary email contact, maybe an info email, whatever. But yeah. I think there's actually a lot of bad actors who are taking advantage of Canadian pilots. I have one company I've seen, they had 92% of their declarations couldn't be compliant. They were using the ASTM logo, the Transport Canada logo, but then you look at the data and you're like, wait, you don't have a flight termination system? Well, that the propeller is going to keep spinning when it's under parachute, and it's going to lacerate someone's face. It's going to cut someone's face. So that's going to cause a severe injury. They don't have a manual triggering device. Okay, so they have no way to stop flyaways, and without a manual triggering device, whether it's through software or a physical device, you're not going to comply with ASTM. Like, so those ones, I think there's bad actors who are trying to trick pilots that like they got caught off ground, but like I call bullshit on that one.
Yeah, so now if we look here at this list, right, like DJI, for example, takes up like 4 different pages, right?
Of course.
But none of their drones are available for flight over people. So now in this regard, like how do you guys come in? Like how do your products get put onto this list? So I know that I'd asked you this question when we're on the phone, but like if I'm somebody that's going to go and buy an M300 and I want to use it for flight over people, how can I make sure that my drone with your parachute is compliant?
Yeah, so in on that list, so we're the modifier. So what we do is we declare that with our system, the M300 now is good for over people. So you get controlled airspace, near people, over people. We piggyback off the DJI near people controlled airspace, and then we do the ASTM F3322 and then the ASTM F3389 for the US market, but default will end up having it for Canada on the parachute for the M300. And what a pilot does is when they're registering their drone, it costs $5 on the Transport Canada portal. They have all their drones registered. They have their drone license, basic, advanced. If they're a flight reviewer, there's another portal piece of that. And they go and they register with our system. So when they're flying with our system, it's now become the AVSS parachute that's for the DJI M300. And for pilots, it doesn't mean they have to switch back and forth. Like if they go a day without flying with our parachute because they're scanning a rural field with no one there, that's fine. You still maintain our declaration. You just take off the chute. You just make sure you don't fly, within 5 meters or over people. So ultimately, it's a registration thing. You just go and, I like doing ATIPs, like in data, seeing where we sit. Like when we look at commercial drones, we're top 5 of registrations because we're the modifier on the M300. And on the M300, we're 84% market share. Why? Because, we take this stuff very seriously. We go through the testing, good relationships with the dealers. We're not the most expensive MSRP. Our dealers are making money. So it's a good relationship all around. And so pilots just go and register, and it's a simple process. There's no change in workflow to add a parachute from being a modifier.
Yeah, so I mean, for example, looking at the list here, right, like your manufacturer name shows AVSS, and it shows that's an ASTM compliant M200 or M300 using your parachute. So it's actually a total separate entry. Now, I see there's 548 entries here, right? And as TC goes through and does this audit, more and more will fall. I mean, I think that when you made that post, you said there was like 648 down to 602, and now when we're talking, it's 548. So how low do you think something like this can go? Like how many more companies are potentially going to be removed from this list?
And it's interesting. So when I was posting, there was like some technical glitches in the page on Transport Canada was going 549, 579, and it must have been in that like cookie background. I think they had a clearing list of, I think that's 93 drones that were removed. So that's step one. I think like this has become a bigger topic than I realized. Like for me, it's like I had phone calls today. I've had emails come in. I've had LinkedIn messages. I've seen the Facebook chats from my colleagues that monitor that activity. And I think ultimately, when you're doing this, you're going to see that the list of who's compliant and who's not is going to drop. I think you're going to see drone manufacturers out there today that shouldn't be, that are making declarations that they're good for controlled airspace, good for near people, but ultimately they're not actually good for over people. Like, I see drones on there. It's like, wait, you don't have a flight termination system. You don't have a backup device. You're 7 kg. You're probably going to get removed. So my hope is that the list gets populated with the right companies. Like, again, I think Autel will be back. But I also think that you're going to see the list get dwindled down on companies that haven't been audited yet and they're skirting it. I think more and more issues that arise here, because there's another piece of this, is moving forward, if you don't trust this list and you need to verify, this is going to affect these companies. And I think Transport Canada probably is going to have an onus on verification now. I think pilots are going to argue that I've spent so much money and time on these systems and you took them away and I lost that job, that there's going to be a push on, like, if you're on the list, who has checked your documents? And I think there's a regulator role, and I think there's an OEM role with that, with these lists.
So that pretty much highlights everything about why this is such an important topic, right? Like, who's the one that's losing out here? It's the pilots. Who's really the ones that are to blame? I'd say it's probably the manufacturers, right? And also, it just kind of seems like with these declarations, it's something that any company could try to do to get on the list. Like, for example, let's say DJI comes out with a Mavic 4 and they want to get on this list. It's something like they just simply say, hey, we want to be on the list, and then Transport Canada allows them to be on that list. I mean, that's kind of the way that I'm kind of picking up what you're saying here. So I guess a good way to end this, right, is like, what do you recommend for pilots who are potentially looking to add to their fleet, maybe who are potentially looking to start a business, kind of start a fleet? I mean, I would say my recommendation is buy a quality product from a trusted manufacturer that is going to pass all the safety regulations, right? So I won't lie, I look through that list and I see a bunch of manufacturers that I don't know, right? But I look at trusted names like DJI, and I look at trusted names like yourself, like AVSS. So what would you say is really the best way for pilots to go about navigating this change?
Like I know for me, what we're going to do is we'll submit all our documentation to our dealers. They already have it. They have our ASTM documentation, our proof. I always reference it as it's like your university transcript. It is what it is. It's just grades. How you got there doesn't matter, but it's like that you have there. And I think the dealers will play a role in solving this issue. I think they'll play a role in picking the vendors that have their reputation, that they've looked at the documentation. And then I think the pieces is also making sure the documentation is legit. There's rubber stamp third-party testers that people have used in the past that have gotten caught by other regulators, like the FAA has caught some people cheating on this testing. And I think that the quality of who you work with, like, we work with New Air out of New York for the FAA testing, ASTM testing. North Dakota's got a really good reputation. So, like, those companies, who you test with matters. And I think the pilots really don't be afraid to ask the manufacturers, let me see your documentation, prove it. And, like, anyone who pulls, well, no, it's proprietary, I would tell them, like, okay, I'm gonna go with someone who's not as cagey, and like, hey, if you want a parachute from AVSS and you want to see the ASTM documentation, send us an email. We'll verify that you're a real company. You're just not some Joe who's just trying to pull data. But we'll give you that data. Why? Because it's just the testing results. We publish this data, and I think that's, like, closing off the big theme here is we're in aviation. Things need to be safe. Things need to be verified, and if we don't police ourselves, someone will police us, like this Transport Canada situation, and the pilots, your customers, are the ones who suffer. So I think it's a really big onus on the manufacturers, the modifiers. If you can't pass, don't declare. You're just going to screw your business in 3 years. Stop thinking short term, thinking that you're crude aviation, thinking that, like, be an adult. Like, it's time for the industry to grow up and get their shit together and say, I'm only going to make declarations that are honest and true, and I'm not going to screw my customers over, because I won't have a business in 5 years if I take that approach.
I love it. I love speaking with you about all these topics, before or after there's any sort of convention, before or after any product release, anything like that. You're always a great voice to kind of bounce ideas off of, especially with something like this, because you're in the weeds with this each and every day. And I think that it's really awesome that you're bringing up stuff like this, because, again, I think that your voice is going to help this industry mature into something, that is not, let's say self-regulated, right? Where we're just hoping that the drones we buy are going to be safe. We're hoping that we're going to be able to use them each and every day. So, again, again, like I mentioned, if you're going to be starting up a business, if you're going to be a large company that is adding, let's say, a drone section onto your company, again, let's say you're an inspection company, a construction company, definitely make sure you go with the best products out there. I couldn't recommend DJI drones more. I know that there's other great manufacturers out there, like you had mentioned, Josh. Autel is awesome. It's kind of a weird fluke that they were removed off the list. And of course, Josh, when you want to go and make sure that you want to fly over people, buy a good parachute, being ABSS.